Hello there, I'm Nathalia Melo, your unfiltered fit BFF, mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify their fitness journey so they can lose weight, regain their confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Let's go. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. And today we have an incredibly amazing and competent guest that I've had the pleasure of meeting personally. And I do, she should charge me some bragging rights because sometimes I'm like, do you know who I know? So today we have Dr. Carrie Pagliano, and Carrie is a pelvic floor physical therapist, and she specializes in the areas of women's health, and she has been doing so for the past almost 25 years. And, she received her master's of physical therapy from the University of Science in Philadelphia, and the doctor of physical therapist from the University of St. Augustine for health science. We're not going to say years because we want to stay young. And we want to stay young. And she's also double certified clinical specialist in orthopedics and women's health. And for 7 years, Carrie served on the executive board of the Academy of Pelvic Health Physical Therapy. And you were the president of that as well, weren't you?
I was. Yeah. I finished all my service right as COVID started. So good news, right?
Smart lady. Well, welcome, Carrie. Did I miss anything? Was there anything that I butchered?
Supermom.
I tried to condense. You have so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think probably the most important part is the two kids that I have managed to keep alive for a while like that. And they taught me more about anything than many of the education courses I've taken. So
Do be facts. So let's go back. So I met Carrie in a seminar that I was doing with Anthony Lowe, who is another very respected and known physical therapist from Australia. And I was there surrounded by all these smart people. And I'm like, holy shit, should I even be here?
Yes. That was so fun because it was so cool to just watch you be like, wait a second, there's something here. I got to figure this out. It was watching like the internal struggle. It was really cool.
Yeah. And this was back. And at that point, I had already taken a whole bunch of pre and postnatal courses. And I had been, a personal trainer for
long time,
many years.
Yeah.
Let's keep the dates out of the conversation because it ages us. The Botox is doing a good job. Anyway, I digress. And even going there, it was so eye-opening. So talk to us a little bit what exactly a pelvic floor physical therapist is, because I feel like a lot of people don't know what that is.
Yeah. And to be honest, it's changed so much. How I work now is not at all how I worked when I started. I mean, essentially, ideally, we have a better understanding. We have additional education in how a pelvic floor works. And it used to be primarily just working with women. There's a lot of pelvic floor physios now that work with men, that work with kids, that work with all sorts of different aspects beyond pregnancy and postpartum, work with geriatrics, people that have neurological issues, things like that. But me specifically, I've mostly done women's pelvic health my entire career and really have kind of hyper niched since I had my own kids, and they're 9 and 12 now, working a lot with pregnant and postpartum athletes because I feel like moms are so much more active than they ever were before and just really want to get back to doing that stuff. And there really hasn't been a ton of resources. So for me, now doing this for 25 years, I encompass, yes, the pelvic floor, but because I work with athletes, I need to know how the rest of their body works. I need to know about how they manage pressure if they're lifting weights, like how they manage impact if they're running, like all sorts of things like that. So for me, it's the best job in the world because I get to do a little bit of everything. But yes, it does come back to the pelvic floor and symptoms like leakage or prolapse or things along those lines.
Okay. Before we even start talking about, because I feel like there are many women
Mm-hmm.
that don't even know what pelvic floor actually
Yep.
is. And I'm not saying this as a way to shade anybody, but I really want to make this podcast as educational as possible
Yeah,
because I really do think that having even knowing what it is can help answer a lot of questions or
yeah,
at least know where to go for answers.
exactly.
So what is the pelvic floor?
So it's a muscle just like any other muscle in your body. I think people kind of think of muscles as like biceps or quads or glutes or things like that. This is just like that, but it's kind of strung like a hammock between your tailbone and your pubic bone in the front. So it kind of acts as a hammock. And it works in a lot of different ways. It helps a lot with posture. It's peeing, pooping, sex. So really important things there. It makes sure that it keeps the pee and the poop in and lets it out and relaxes when you're trying to go to the bathroom. It's that muscle that contracts really strongly in orgasm. So really important muscle there. It's the muscle that has to relax and get out of the way in vaginal delivery. It's a helper breathing muscle. People don't realize that. But I think the thing that people really, you don't really almost have permission to talk about it until you have kids. And so we don't really think about it until then. And so that's one of the things we've actually chatted about this, especially when you have daughters, like teaching proper anatomy, teaching kids that you do have muscles down there and that's how you start and stop your pee and just little things like that.
Yeah.
So it's a really important area. I think again, with pregnancy and postpartum, we think about, oh my gosh, the weight of the baby was on that for a long time. I've got to get those muscles to relax and get out of the way so that the head can come through. Like the first time we really think about it is not necessarily in the most positive way.
Yeah, the whole pregnancy, like the way we start talking about pelvic floor, it normally comes from pregnancy
Yep.
and postpartum, which doesn't really sell it very much.
No, no.
So, how does pregnancy and postpartum impact your pelvic floor?
Because we are vertical bipedal, so we're on two legs standing upright. That makes it so when we are pregnant, there's a lot of pressure downward on the pelvic floor. A bajillion and 1 years ago, when we were on all fours, that pressure went through our belly. The pelvic floor really wasn't taking a lot of the brunt on that. So that's the other thing to remember too, is that the purpose is kind of like the job has shifted because we got vertical. And so you not only have the organs that are in there, you have your bladder that's constantly filling and emptying. You have your rectum that's filling and emptying. You've got this uterus that's growing and extending kind of up and out so that, it's going out of your kind of your belly. And that's where, the fetus is growing. That's a lot of pressure downward. So that's the other thing too. People don't think that, you would have pelvic floor issues if you had a cesarean section. And you can. I mean, I did. It's, I had 2 C-sections. I still carried babies for, 9 months. So that can still play a role.
So the actual delivery is just part of the equation. It's not the whole
It's
equation.
not the whole thing. No, because I mean, you're still pregnant for 9 months. And so, but again, people tend to think, oh, vaginal delivery, that's the first time the pelvic floor is involved. And it's not. It's literally been involved since the day you were born. And so that's the thing that people don't realize is how a lot of the issues that don't come up until pregnancy or postpartum, we can actually go back and look like, did you have leakage when you were a kid? Did you have bedwetting when you jumped on a trampoline, or did you giggle? Did you have leakage then? What sports did you do? That kind of stuff. That can kind of give us a sense of how you use those muscles. Were there any issues with those muscles before you even thought about getting pregnant?
Okay. I love that. Now we're going to move on to the buzzword of the moment. And I think
There's so many.
Oh no! Oh, you do.
You got to narrow it down. There's too many.
Too many variables. Okay. Diastasis
Yeah, that's where I figured you were going, but I didn't want to throw out a buzzword that we didn't need to freak people out with. Okay.
Yeah. So diastasis
Yeah.
recti. And before we start talking about
Yep.
diastasis recti, I actually want to tell you, when I was a guest on your podcast, I'm not sure if I
Mhm.
told you this story, but I have a member in our community who just had a baby.
Mhm.
She's in Switzerland, and
Oh, yeah.
she came to me like panicking because, you know, her doctor said at the 6 weeks that she was cleared to exercise, but the only thing she couldn't do was crunches because she had a gap, big gap.
Mm.
And then she went to a pelvic floor physical therapist, and then the pelvic floor physical therapist told her that she needed to stop. Like, you was just so much scaremongering about everything.
I know.
So let's talk a little bit about diastasis
Yeah.
recti and what it is.
Yep. So when we are pregnant, and guys can get this too, like guys with like big old bellies, this can happen too. But in pregnancy, the baby has to
Lay off the beer, man.
the baby's got to go somewhere. So the abdominals, think of like the hottest guy that you know with amazing six-pack abs, okay? They still have that line down through the center, and hot girl, six-pack abs, same deal. So this is like not pregnant. You see that line down the center, and that's the linea alba, and that's just a line of tissue. So when you are pregnant, that line of tissue, its job is to start to stretch. And what ends up happening is like two sides of the six pack, they start to separate just a little bit, but they're still connected. It's not like there's, been slicing or dicing or things like that. Like they're still connected, but that linea alba or that tissue has to stretch and kind of get out of the way. And so that tissue changes in 100% of pregnant women. Now, I think where it gets scary is then you start to put a term on things and then people get freaked out. So in postpartum, obviously baby's not in utero anymore. Obviously, the body ideally is going to go back or try and return to the location where everything started. The way I explain it is basically your abs change zip codes. And so it's like one zip code and then it kind of changes to another one and it's trying to move back. And some people, it works. Like genetically, some people do really, really well and everything goes back. And those are those people that kind of walk out of the hospital in their pre-pregnancy genes. And then
that wasn't me.
That was not me either.
Nope.
I had to send my mother-in-law to go get bigger underwear because my legs were so swollen. I couldn't fit through the holes. It was so bad.
Same.
Well, yeah, C-section, you got it. Yeah. So what happens is ideally as those tissues are healing, sometimes those two sides don't come back, so to speak. I hate saying come back because it's like they don't come as close as they once were because that linea alba tissue doesn't have as much like elasticity, I guess, or get it to kind of come back. And so that's where you can kind of see that space. But the other thing that we're kind of looking at too, and sometimes that can improve with time, just depends on the person, is also the depth. And so if you were to do that test where you kind of come up and do like a half crunch and you stick your finger in that space, how wide is the space and then how deep is it? And that's where people get totally freaked out because if the pressure pushes through from the abdomen, then it makes it look like coning or doming, which everybody's all freaked out about. And it's really like, so what? It's just pressure.
Just a symptom.
Exactly. It's just that.
Like
the only time
it's just showing you what's happening.
The only time you worry about it is if there's like guts spewing out, AKA like a hernia. I mean, I have a tiny little umbilical hernia. It doesn't bother me. It was from my second kid. It's not painful. No organs are being strangulated. It's a non-issue. But what we can do is we can make that depth better by learning how to turn on our deeper abdominals. And so for a really, really long time, the researchers were like, the gap is bad. Don't do things that, entice the gap. And so that's where the whole like sit-ups, crunches, planks, all that stuff was bad. And it was that way for a long time. And then a couple sets of researchers were like, oh, well, let's use our abs. And what they realized then was like, oh, well, if we use our abs, it actually opens the gap slightly because it's almost like a suspension bridge. When you put a little tension on it, it goes from being a very saggy suspension bridge to pulling apart and making it a taut suspension bridge, which is actually really good. But the people that didn't like the gap were like, ooh, this is bad. It makes the gap worse. Don't do this stuff. But the other group was like, oh, what does this actually mean? And so by learning to engage deep abdominals and getting that coordination back and kind of getting that wiring connected, you can actually generate tension better across that taut suspension bridge. And then you're containing pressure nicely, everything's doing well, and it's a non-issue. But usually most people, they talk about it because they think like mummy tummy or muffin top or things like that are related. And lots of times it's not.
And also another thing that I think it's interesting to add is that go back to normal. Yeah, but what does normal look like?
Right.
And I think that that's what a lot of people don't really know. Like, did you ever measure what your gap was before pregnancy? Chances are you probably did not.
Well, and I think the other thing, I mean, I had a really interesting conversation with a client today, just talking about what their expectations were for their body. And there's some people that really, and again, it's not a good or a bad thing. It probably makes it quite challenging postpartum, that honestly, truly believe that their body should be exactly the same postpartum as it would be before you had a kid. But we're older. Obviously, ideally, if you had a kid, you're 9 months older. Like there's normal changes that occur. And you just had basically like this leech growing inside of your body, and then you exit.
Leech.
Well, it really kind of is. It's like
Dad.
I love my children, I do, but like, they took up a lot of space. There's going to be like, when somebody moves in and then they move out, they kind of leave a mess, and so it's not exactly the same as when they moved in. So between that and, genetics and tissue changes and time and age, we're going to be different. And this conversation I had with a client, we were talking about prolapse, where your organs can kind of move. She had this idea of her internal organs being like a two-dimensional picture that from like health class in fourth grade. It never occurred to her that organs are supposed to move and shift. And like, that's how it was. So when she realized things were moving, it totally freaked her out. But I'm like, this has been going on your whole life. You just, you thought the world was flat and it's really round. So
100%.
Yeah.
And just kind of to piggyback on what you were talking about there on the crunches and, oh my God, it's the worst thing.
Right.
It depends, like most things in our space. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the can versus should, because that was something that took me a long time to which I think that was what you saw whenever I was at Anthony's seminar. It was the can versus should, kind of like having a fight in my brain. And it's kind of like a lot of people ask the wrong question.
Yes.
In my opinion, it's kind of like, can I do like toe touches when I'm like 9 months pregnant? I mean, you probably can, depending on how fit you are. Right. But the question should be another one. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. And just to caveat this stuff too, like I didn't know a lot of this stuff going into having my own kids. We were taught very conservatively as physical therapists, like, hey, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, we don't want to make things worse. We were taught back in the day that if you used a band to bring both sides of your abs together, it would teach them to work in that new position. Like, that's just not how it works. So
that is part of my question. We're going to get there. But I love that you said that.
No, and that's the thing that it's one of those things that, can you do really hard stuff? Yes, but it's going back and like, okay, well, what's the cost? And is it a better idea to build in a base or learn a strategy? So like when I'm first working with moms, it's really important to reconnect the wiring, refine your zip code. Like it's all about connection so that when you're building, so if we're like building a skyscraper, we're building on top of a really solid foundation instead of building on a shoddy foundation that when you get to a certain point, something's going to give. And so kind of like you said, I mean, it depends. Like it depends on what it is. If I have a mom that if they don't go work out, there's going to be a serious mental health issue and they're going to be in really big trouble safety-wise in early postpartum, I'm going to figure out a way for them to do it safely so that it meets their needs. That might not be the case with somebody it's not kind of what they're using it for. They're just trying to build that base. We might try something a little bit different. It's like, it depends on what we're trying to kind of hit. And so just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should, but it all depends on kind of what deficits you have. What are you trying to get back to? Is this your job? This is the other thing that's coming up now that we see more pro women athletes that are, and we're hearing stories about women that had to go back, like all the women like Kara Goucher, who's a runner that she was with Nike. And they're like, basically, if you don't run and compete, we're not paying you. And
which is
so,
disgusting.
yeah,
We could do a
totally,
whole podcast about
100%.
that.
And like her kid's not that much older than my oldest. And it's like, okay, you literally will not eat if you don't get your butt out there and run. And so should she have, woulda, coulda, shoulda, like that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of it depends in all of it.
I think that what I'm asking more is for like your everyday person, your like everyday athlete.
Yeah.
Because there is this, but I saw that person doing on social media. I'm like, yeah, but you're not inside her vagina to know what it looks like.
No.
Though.
And that's the thing. I mean, social media is a whole other conversation. Tia Toomey, who she was 6-time CrossFit world champion, she just had her baby like 3 days ago. And all the things that she was doing wouldn't be things that I would like, I probably can't do anyway as a normal athlete. Like she's that good. I don't know what's going on in her body. I'm also not a 6-time world champion. So to compare, that's not really fair either. So it really is just because you see somebody doing something, you don't know what the real story is. They might not even know what's going on in their bodies. They might not be aware of things, or they might just be ignoring it. You don't know. So that's why it's like, that's a whole other thing. But it's important to kind of know that for all of us, it's good to know where you stand. It's good to know your deficits, and kind of, Lisa Ryan says, slow is fast, build that base, and then make sure that you're building on top of that nice foundation.
Yeah, 100%, especially because whenever you look at the grand scheme of things, our life expectancy is like 73, I think between 73 and 75. Pregnancy is like 9 months out of that.
Yeah, it's such a blip.
Whatever percentage is that. Is it really worth to be pushing the boundaries? And again, it's not for me to decide, but I think it's about educating people and giving people the tools that they need to make educated choices if they think that it is worth it for themselves to go balls to the walls and do all the things. Yeah. By all means, knock yourself out.
Yeah. No, I've had actually more clients lately. First kid, they wanted to get back to running quickly. We built them a nice program. They're asymptomatic. And then they get to a certain point and then they come back and they're like, you know what? I don't really need to do this right now. I don't need to do a half marathon at 4 months postpartum or 6 months postpartum. I'm like, and here's the thing, like if that's what you tell me what you want to do, as long as I can do it safely with you and, you're asymptomatic, like we can make this work in certain scenarios, but like, why kill yourself?
I love that you said this, because that's actually my next question that I had here, because I do know that you specialize in helping women get back to running after having kids. And, I think that people look at running after they have a kid a bit like the lowest hanging fruit.
Yes.
Oh, I'm just going to go for a jog. Like, it's not too much. It's just running.
Yeah.
And I'm like, like I'm scrolling through, like, again, scrolling. A lot of the things that I get is from social.
Yeah.
Because if it is somebody that I know, I will say something because I have a lot of feelings.
Yes.
And it's like people like 4 weeks postpartum just went for my first jog. And I'm like,
I know.
What?
I know. And for me, it's such a double-edged sword, because I've literally run since 7th grade. I'm not fast, but I've done it for a really long time. It's something that I enjoy doing. I know for some people, it's like their soul, their identity, who they are. And usually that's what it is when they're trying to get back, or first kid and they feel like they have something to prove, because let's just be honest, all of us felt like we had something to prove with our first kid. And by the time our second, we're like, we're over it.
I was like, YOLO, man, I'm going to take a nap. My kids are 14 months apart. You better believe I was taking naps.
No. You're too brave for me. No. And I think that's the other thing too. You hit on a lovely point where people are like, oh, it's easy. I can walk out the door and just do it. And it's because our society expects you go pop out a baby and then you go on like nothing happened. It's not treated like, wow, you not only had a 9-month buildup to this, that you had to have all these physical challenges, but then you had this birth, and then you're also trying to feed or running on low sleep or trying to lose the baby weight and probably under fueling and kind of all this other stuff. And oh, by the way, you're learning how to be a parent. And it's just a lot of demand. It's not treated like a post-surgical situation where, let's say it's like an ACL or something, you're going to have that initial respite of rest and then slowly build back and
Nah,
have a protocol. And you got to do
nah.
X, Y, and Z before you can run. And you would have a clearance and have to pass the clearance before you run. Like that, honestly, that's the driving factor to all of this. And so we started to get more guidance on that in 2019. So right before COVID, Tom Goom, Emma Brockwell, and Grania Donnelly, who are physios over in the UK, they basically pulled together what little research they could to be like, hey, this is a starting point, and we need to consider beyond the pelvic floor. We need to look at balance, because I don't know about you, I changed a whole half a shoe size with my kids.
Same.
Which is insane. And plus our center of gravity changed so much. We look at ankle strength. And here's the thing too, when your foot hits the ground, if it's not absorbing impact, it's just going to get kicked up the chain. And the pelvic floor is basically the mom of the body. It's like, all right, you're not going to do it. I guess I'm going to take care of it. And if it doesn't handle that impact right off the bat, even if you don't have pelvic floor issues now, like there's more work for the pelvic floor to have to do.
I love that you're covering that. So if we could give like a little bit more of so people can really understand and not have to catch from what are, and again, this is going to be broad. And if you're not comfortable saying this, I'm perfectly okay with that. What can be the problem with getting back to running too soon after having a baby?
So big swath, big picture, your whole body is weaker. Your balance is worse. You haven't had impact in how many months? Your brain doesn't know how to fluctuate and work as a dimmer switch. It only knows on and off.
Yeah.
And so things aren't firing and coordinating when they're supposed to. And you don't know how to handle pressure, plus all the zip code changes and that kind of stuff too. So you literally have an entirely different body, and you're asking it to perform in a way that it did when it didn't have any of those challenges. And so that's why it's so important to screen out and be like, hey, where are these deficits? Let me address them ahead of time to see if I'm even ready to do it. And then also, like, walking is so great, like being able to walk 40 minutes and not have leakage or not feel like your organs are falling out or things like that. Can you use a carrier? Some people really can't because of the pressure and that sort of thing. These are all basic criteria to be like, hey, do I even have the base fitness level to put my foot out there and even attempt a jog and see if it's okay? And then the next big thing that people really mess up is they're like, hey, let me just go for a run and see how it goes, which is freaking ridiculous. Like, why do a setup? Like, why set yourself up? Why don't we do a little and see what happens? Do a little and see what happens. Like, can we be a little more intentional instead of like, let's just do all the things and then be really upset when it doesn't work out the way we want?
Yes. And I think that also, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you know, because there are the practitioners like yourself who are very pro exercise and who support the goals that the person has and allows them to make educated choices. But you know that there is still a lot of pelvic floor physical therapists and even gynecologists or GYNs. They're very old school.
Yes.
Like, don't lift above 25 pounds. Don't do this.
Right.
There is a whole bunch of don'ts.
Yes.
That can be a problem as well, because I feel like you're not looking at a woman as a whole. It's just like an incubator.
Yes.
So how does somebody know if the person that they are speaking to is the right person for them? What are the like red flags?
I think when you have that spidey sense, and it's not wrong. Like, it's the same thing in pregnancy too. When people are surprised about what you do, or like, hey, I've always run, or I've always lifted, or I mean, like, you go to the gym every day. When somebody looks at that there's something wrong with it, or they don't understand it, or, oh, you shouldn't do that. And there's two things that occur. One is you're going to stop listening to them because that's what you want to do anyway. And two, they can't possibly, you're not going to be the person to tell them that that's okay. And so automatically when you have that person, what I see a lot with PTs, again, just go run and see what happens. No, don't do that. Or if you have to explain certain lifts to people and they're like, well, what is that? I'm like, if you don't know that, you shouldn't be doing this. And it's hard too, because I really, and this is where I want to give credit. There's a lot more physios now trying to understand CrossFit, trying to understand Olympic lifting, trying to understand running. But there's something to be said for actually doing it. I didn't start CrossFit till my youngest was 3. So that was 6.5 years ago. I went in the gym, shut my mouth, didn't tell anybody I was a PT for a year because I wanted to understand. I wanted to learn. Now I can put my filter over it. But like, I don't know what the hell I was talking about. I had no business telling anybody how to do any sort of lift. But there's something to be said to go in and experience that and be in that position to try and understand that. And so there's enough of us around there now. And that, again, this is the good side of social media. Chances are people are going to gravitate to people that they connect with over like running or CrossFit or whatever it is your interest is, HIIT, yoga, Pilates, Peloton, I don't care what it is. If you have somebody with some experience in that, plus what you're already looking at, it's going to be a good match because they ultimately, you guys want to do the same thing. They understand it. They understand the culture. They understand where you're trying to go with it. And so again, the client I had earlier today, the OB, she went to go see an OB that she hadn't seen before. And the OB was like, you know what? You're done running. She's only had one kid. She's like, you're done running. You're done lifting. You're done doing this. You can't do that anymore.
Oh, that kills me.
And she's like, no.
That's a bit too drastic.
Well, and she had been following me online and she's like, you guys are really different and you're providing me hope and they are not.
Hope being the key word here. Hope being the key word.
And I'm not promising I can fix everything or I have the answers to everything. But what I am saying is there's a possibility. We're going to try and get you to return as close to what you love doing, that you identify with, that's who you are. That's a pretty good proposition in my book. And again, that's kind of how I got into doing more of this is I wasn't with what I was taught to do initially as a physio. There was a huge gap between what we were taught on the treatment table and actually running. And I understood that because of my background in orthopedics and sports. And I was like, all right, well, pelvic floor land says I can't do any more than this, but I need to go run and there needs to be something in the middle here. And that's actually how I got into lifting a little bit too, is because I was like, there's a gap here. I need to build some more power and some strength. So
I love that. So the way that you got into lifting and things like that was kind of like to learn so that you could apply.
Yes. Yeah. My very, very first powerlifting client, she's had her first kid now. So I saw her like 15 years ago, I think. And I was working in a hospital and she was powerlifting and started to leak at 330 with a sumo deadlift. And her 1 rep max was a 350. I'm like, how the hell am I supposed to reproduce this in a hospital system?
Yeah, no.
Good thing is she had an out of state coach. And so she had a lot of videos and we played with a lot of stuff. And actually she ended up doing really well. I was like, are you willing to change your setup? Because she had this whole big, like, of course you have to breath hold. Like you're lifting freaking 350 pounds off the ground. You have to hold your breath.
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
So if the second I would have said to her, well, you can't breath hold anymore. Like, that's just stupid.
and it's not realistic. But the thing is that if you're not on the ground,
right.
If you're not, it's kind of, and I feel that there is a lot of no shade at the doctors listening. We love you, boo.
Yes, totally.
But in the healthcare professions, we love you too. You're the best. And I remember going to my nurse practitioner and like there was a big like sign telling the world about how horrible carbs are. And everybody, and I don't mean this as shade, but everybody in the office was severely overweight. And I'm like, so there is a big disconnect. And that's not to say that whatever you want to do with your body, by all means, knock yourself out. But it's very hard to understand the lifestyle of somebody that is fit and active and have the one size fits all solution.
Exactly.
When you haven't walked the walk.
Exactly. 100%.
Which I loved that you spoke a little bit about holding breath. And before you talked about the corsets, which I hope it has gone away. I still have people from time to time ask me about like waist trainers and things like that postpartum. Just share, talk about. Let's talk about. I have so many thoughts, but I want to let you talk about it.
Yeah. So I mean, my whole thing is like if you're in like Kardashian style crap where you're just like trying to be teeny tiny, like you're going to get things squirting in all different directions. I do think that there's a place in postpartum, and at least in hospitals here, I'm in the DC metro area. A lot of my C-section moms are giving a little bit of support embrace too, which I don't think is a bad idea because post C-section, you feel really vulnerable anyway. Just as a little bit of compression support. I wore that after both my C-sections just to help with some of the swelling. But
a little bit being the key word.
Yeah. It's a little bit of compression and you're out of it pretty much by 6 weeks or so. You're not in it for a really long time because that's where we need to find those abdominals and get connected. So in the beginning, when you are carrying a baby around and you can't find your abs and you have to get out of bed at 2 a.m. because you've got to get up and feed a kid and it takes forever to find a latch position, all of that. Like it's nice to have a little bit of support, especially when those tissues are healing. But there's a finite line to that. Now that's
how do you know?
What's that? How do you know?
How do you know?
I mean, if you're wearing anything beyond 6 weeks, that's too long. I mean, honestly, the first 3 to 5, maybe, and that's pushing it, I think. But that also goes back to soft tissue healing too. Like by 6 weeks, we're only at about 75% soft tissue healing, but we're on the right track. So if you have a C-section, things should be really healed by then. Same thing if you've had any tearing from the vaginal delivery, things should be reasonably, from a tissue perspective, healed. That doesn't mean they're back to normal. That doesn't mean they're back to full strength. But the tissues themselves should be close to, that 75% healing point.
So what about the pressure?
So again, like a little bit of support is fine to contain, but when you're doing like that squeeze in the middle, it's going to kind of shoot up and shoot down. And so that's where like the really severe, and that's why I go Kardashian, just because that's an immediate visual for people. That's not what we're looking for. It's a very different garment. It's very even compression. It's very supportive. It's not trying to cinch and kind of make something go somewhere and shove organs around and that sort of thing. So
the goal is not to look snatched.
No,
the goal is to kind of like just like hold things where
it's
you
support.
haven't been able to feel.
Exactly.
And what can be, because we get asked often with on my social media and sometimes with new members that come in and again, it's not your fault. It's not your job as a listener or as a new mom to know, because there's so much information out there. So I welcome the questions, but what can be, if there is any evidence on the potential consequences, and again, could have, would have, should have, but that increased pressure on your abdominal cavity, what can be the consequences of that being worn so tight so soon after giving birth?
Oh gosh. I mean, there's not going to be any research on it because nobody's going to throw money at that, but
screw the women after giving birth and continuing society. Peasants, what do they need?
No, we get nothing. No, I mean, it's just, again, like especially if you're doing it before those tissues are healed and even after, like when it's that severe, and again, I think that's only certain, generally now we're seeing much more general support, but if you are so cinched in that waist trainer trying to make something go back, you're setting yourself up, quite honestly. It's you squeeze around the middle, things squirt down. Now, what I will say is the one that I see more often, and unfortunately I do see some coaches and trainers talking about this, is like mom jeans are bad or high-waisted leggings.
Oh, you just made a post about it.
I know. That one's been around for a while, sadly. I have to bring it up every once in a while. But it's just, I would say there's a very small percentage of people that with a little compression, they're sensitive to it and they might feel organs heavier, that sort of thing. But in general, like just regular mom jeans and regular high-waisted leggings, if somebody took those away from me, I would be very upset because I just would but it's.
Well, I love my high-waisted leggings.
Right.
I'm all about it.
Right. And so I think demonizing certain pieces of apparel that are reasonable, like waist trainers, not reasonable. Kardashian style corsets, not reasonable. Like that's on the extreme end. My mom jeans and your high-waisted leggings that aren't 17 sizes too small, like totally fine.
17 sizes.
Well, and if they're giving you trouble, maybe maybe you should get a size up. Like, and I'm being totally honest. Now, I will say, my Athleta leggings, they did tell me to go a size down so it doesn't sag in the crotch, and you all know what I'm talking about. And you do, like, they get saggy if you get the wrong size.
I did not have sag on the crotch on my bingo card for today's conversation.
Well, no, it's literally a conversation I had while running at CrossFit with a 20-something the other day. And she's like, we were both wearing capris, and she's like, they sag around the waist, and it's really hard to find leggings that when you move don't sag in the crotch. It's the same thing with like saggy pants. When you're postpartum and your butt's not filling the cheeks in the back, they get kind of saggy. Anyway, I digress. But those are real issues. And so people try and solve them by going tighter. And sometimes tighter is not better for certain things. But we don't need to demonize. Like, somebody was demonizing high heels the other day. I'm like, really? Like, can we demonize them because of the patriarchy, not because of pelvic floor issues that they don't cause? So.
Yeah, that's kind of like, that's how I feel about a lot of the nutrition things as well.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. It's kind of like, when can we find in pelvic floor health, pre and postpartum, the nutrition side of things, like hashtag Team Common Sense?
Yes. Oh my God.
Because everything is somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have like to be, from a pre and postnatal standpoint, it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, you're a delicate little flower. You can only just go swimming like twice a week because otherwise you're going to break in the middle. But it also doesn't have to be, I'm going to sign up for a marathon the day after I give birth.
Well, I think it's because it's a new context for people, and no one wants to be the person that does it wrong, not realizing that there's not a right way to do it. But you're trying to do things right, and you don't know what the hell you're doing. And people use it as an opportunity to reinvent themselves or make up for what they didn't have in their child. Like, there's a lot of different reasons for it. And so I think, and it's really, really hard to take in all the information that's out there and then also weed out the shit. And it's just, it's hard. It's really hard. And I think
especially
you need to vet your resources and understand who's like a fit influencer. I think you can mash those words together, but did they get their education in a weekend course, or do they, and here's the thing too, there's just as many that actually have a decent medical background that are still spewing poo. So it's not,
you can say shit.
We can say either. I feel like shit is more respectful than poo sometimes. Like, no, it's just poo. It's not even worth shit. Like, it's not even worth
I like that.
So I think, and again, like, I've been in this so freaking long. Like, I'm like, oh my God, why? How is this stuff still happening? It's like,
it's funny you say that, because like I see somebody who has a big following on social media get pregnant, and I'm like, oh, I know what's coming next.
You do.
I know what's coming next.
You do.
Like, I 100% have a prenatal workout app coming, and I have it on my bingo card.
So that's the other thing to watch out for. I mean, Peloton's a great example of this. They literally had their first pregnant coach, and she was doing their program simultaneously. And when you look at that in the rear view, that's really awful to do to somebody in her first pregnancy. There's another really famous athlete that she published her pregnancy program about 2 weeks before she gave birth. I don't want to jinx myself like that. Like, again, look at when they're coming up with these programs, and it's not to say they don't know things, but and this is again in the rear view. I practiced for 13 years before I had my first kid. And I apologize to a lot of these moms that I'm like, I was like, oh, well, you just got to make time to do stuff. And I didn't give them any resources to do it. And so there's something to be said for, not that, to be a good coach or trainer with pregnancy and postpartum, that you need to have kids, but not for nothing. There's a little bit of a reality check that's involved in that, and a little bit of understanding. I mean, I have leakage issues I navigated. I had prolapse that I've navigated. I have diastasis recti that I've navigated. I know what it feels like to be the patient in that scenario and not have really clear path forward. And I think there's something to be said to have sat in that seat and face that, like, what the hell do I do? Because everything you're telling me is not getting me where I need to go, and I need to be doing something else.
I love that, Carrie, that you said that. And in addition to that, I think that I would even talk about, the people who talk about, oh, but I was able to walk out of the hospital and I had like a six pack and this is what I did. And I'm like, that's great. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work,
Right.
but having the knowledge and, the expertise in the background, not only from firsthand experience, but also from doing several courses, which I have done many of them that you were on the board of advisor, the Girls Gone Strong and Breeze, Brianna Battles, pregnant postpartum athlete. And, that's different because yes, you have your own experience, but you also have to have the knowledge and expertise to be able to navigate different scenarios.
Yeah. I think that's, I mean, and again, that's probably the most important point is we can have all really different experiences. And so if somebody's selling you something and they're like, I guarantee this result in this many days. And then what happens when that doesn't occur? And they're like, peace out. You just didn't work hard enough. Like that's crap. And so that's where, again, like it's kind of, I kind of say it's in the rule of thirds. Like a third of the people, it doesn't matter what they do. They're going to be fine. A third of the people, if you give them some basic stuff, they'll probably be fine. And that's fine. And then a third of the people, you really they need to have that really clear look at my scenario. Let's navigate through this. And so I don't want to poo-poo group exercise and group fitness and programs and things like that, because I very much think that there's a place for it. But when that's not serving you, and just because that's not serving you doesn't mean that that's the end of the road. That just means if you want to get where you're going, you're going to need somebody to dive a little bit deeper in a collaborative way with you to help you find that path.
That is, I'm nodding. I wish you guys could see it. I'm probably going to give myself whiplash here from nodding so hard because I 100% agree. And that's kind of why I personally stepped away from doing more of that group setting, pre and postnatal coaching, because I tried to do it in a very respectful way of the woman's stage of pre and postnatal. But there were some women that could go a bit harder and there were others that couldn't. So how do you personalize the experience to each individual in a way that you're not leaving anybody behind, but you're also not pushing the person too much? So I love when you said that. Carrie, thank you so very much for your time. Can you tell us, our listeners, where they can learn more about you, where they can find you, if they have any questions, if they want to work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the easiest place to find me is Instagram, and it's at Carrie Pagliano. My website, it's carriepagliano.com. So trying to make that super easy. As far as connecting with me, I love, if you just DM me and hey, I heard you on Nathalia's podcast. I have a question. I'm probably like you, I'm in my DMs every day, and just, I love helping people find local resources. I love helping people realize hey, this doesn't sound right. Am I crazy? I'm like, no, you're not. There's ways to do this. I work in Arlington, Virginia, in person. And then I also work virtually, do a lot of consults and try and collaborate with colleagues all over the world. So I love second and third opinions. I love being that person to help kind of pull stuff together when it doesn't make sense and connect people with good resources. So yeah, if you have a question, hop in my DMs. Always happy to answer.
I love it. I love it. And I can vouch for that, by the way. I don't know if you're going to remember this, Carrie, but you actually referred one of my members in Norway and you found somebody there.
Yeah.
In this remote city in the middle of nowhere in Norway. You're like, I think I got somebody for you.
My favorite thing to do is I have really weird connections. And so if I can make that connection for you, because I know how hard it is to be lost, and that there's somebody there that can help you. And I know how amazing it is when you can find that person that can help kind of pull you out of the dark. And so if I can play any role in that for anybody, I'm happy to do it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Carrie, for your time. Guys, go follow Carrie. She shares a lot of stuff on her social. And thank you so much for your time. And I will speak next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment or voice message at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on Instagram and let me know what topics you want to hear more about or who I should have on the show. As for today, this is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.